Following a legislative committee meeting with municipal leaders from all around Connecticut, CCM held a press conference on February 10th to highlight the impact of Connecticut's education cost share funding on local property taxes, municipal budgets, and affordability for residents. On this episode of the Municipal Voice, speakers explain how years of stagnant ECS funding have negatively impacted municipalities and residents, shifting hundreds of millions of dollars in education costs onto local property taxpayers, placing increasing pressure on the household budgets and municipal finances across the state. Local officials will outline why properly funding ECS is critical to improving affordability, stabilizing property taxes, and ensuring equitable support for communities. The Municipal Voice is the Connecticut Conference of Municipalities podcast in collaboration with WNHH LP 103.5 FM. I'm your host, Matt Ford. As always, be sure to give us a like and let us know what you're thinking in the comments. CCM's Municipal Voice podcast continues to present a key forum on important state and local issues. The views expressed do not necessarily reflect the consensus views of CCM or a member of municipal leaders.
My name is Joe DeLong. I'm the Executive Director and CEO of the Connecticut Conference of Municipalities. We are an organization that represents nearly, with the exception of one, nearly every city and town in the state of Connecticut. And we're here today to talk about one very simple issue, but to frame that issue in a way that is a little more complex but critically important. Being that it is an election year, and being that it is the start of a legislative session, and being that affordability at the local level is something that's very important to our residents and our elected leaders, constituents all across the state, we're going to probably hear a lot of ideas. We're already hearing ideas and talks about affordability, about property taxes, about ways to give relief, about ways to give rebates, all of those types of things. None of those things we've even heard about the elimination of the car tax, which is really, unless revenue replaces it, is a complete property tax shift out of cars into homes, doesn't really save anybody anything, and in many cases hurts low-income people the most, those who don't have cars. It raises rents, it does those types of things. But the single largest area in municipal budgets that impacts property taxes the most is the line item for public education. It far outweighs all other expenses and all things that impact property taxes. And you're going to hear from 5 municipal officials about how this impacts their areas, how it impacts their relationships, how it impacts their residents. But I just want to give a very simple framing that we don't often hear, because I can tell you there'll be some news articles or things that'll come out of this that'll be mayors ask for more money, mayors ask for more education funding. But what the framing won't be, except for those who really understand it and get it right, is the educational cost-sharing formula, the foundation grant for public ed, where the state pays its share of public education funds, has not been altered since 2013. If that formula had not changed at all, but was tied to inflation, so the state wasn't really giving more, they were in terms of real dollars, if the state was keeping its real dollar contribution the same to public ed, today the state would be paying almost $900 million more a year to public education. Now, what does that mean in real terms? It means that $900 million of the state's proportional share of the inflationary cost of public ed since 2013 till now has been shifted directly out of the state budget and into property taxes. It is the largest property tax driver that there is. Now, a lot of people will look at that number and say, well, that's outrageous. You couldn't keep pace with that. Well, inflation just doesn't work on the expense side. As we know, it works on the revenue side as well. The state of Connecticut during that time annually today is collecting almost $8 billion more a year in revenue than it was in 2013. Because of inflation, because of wages going up. In fact, the state's revenue collections have actually outpaced inflation during that time. So at a time when we're getting $9 billion more than we were in 2013 in terms of revenue, we have not increased that proportional share of public ed to the point that we've shifted an additional $900 million into tax increases at the local level into the property tax. So what we're really here to say, the message is, if you want to talk about relief to our residents, if you want to talk about property tax relief, if you want to talk about affordability, if you want to talk about keeping people in their homes, this is the most foundational issue that has to be discussed. If we're not discussing it, then we're not serious, because it is the largest driver of unaffordability in our regressive property tax system that there is. So at this time, I'm going to first call up the Mayor of New London, who is the current president of our Board of Directors for the Connecticut Conference of Municipalities, Mayor Michael Passerow.
Good morning, everyone. I want to start first by telling you a story that could take an hour long, but I'm going to try to do it in 3 minutes. The effect of what Joe just told you on my small city. We're a city of about 30,000 people. 60% of the families are your Alice households. Asset limited, income constrained, but employed. I represent a city of the working poor. So when we talk about the impact on property taxes, you're talking about an impact on the folks that suffer the most under this regressive property tax system. And in our school district, 85% of our students are the children of those economically disadvantaged families. So I just need to set that parameters for what I'm dealing with. So not only is there an impact on the property taxes, but I'm in a situation where I can't raise the property taxes. I mean, it's immoral or amoral, however you want to look at it. But I will not pass those costs on to those families who are already trying to make ends meet. Excuse me if I'm tough on this, but it's the way I live daily. So it comes to budget time, and it comes to paying for these children's education, and we can't do it. Going back 5 years, the ECS contribution to my city went up 4.7%. Doable. Boy, those were the good days. We still had to be, it was still tight, but at least there was hope that we could do it year over year. You take that 4.7% contribution down to the current biennial budget, ECS went up 0.7%. Now, how on earth do we cover our increased costs with that? By the same token, it's a perfect storm. We're the victim of the 5-year reval cycle. In 2003, we did our reval. So it hit us in FY24. We had no revenue, no increased revenue. We had to lower our mill rate to save our families from the shift in the tax burden from commercial to residential. And even lowering our mill rate 10 mills, we could barely save our families from an unbearable property tax increase. You're talking of the perfect storm. So we couldn't increase our education budget. We couldn't increase our city budget. We just had to cannibalize ourselves. We cannibalized ourselves again this year, and we'll be cannibalizing ourselves next year. And the worst part about this is the education folks don't understand that, yes, our children are getting cheated, but no, our city can't do anything to help that. We are helpless to help that. It just isn't money there. And so it's a tough situation. This year, now that's a sad story, but this year I'm optimistic, okay? Because with all of these municipal officials behind me, hearing great things from our legislative delegation, hearing great things from our governor, we're confident that we're going to come through this year with reform on ECS, with a brighter path, increase in the foundation amount, and a path forward to phase in equitable funding of our education system.
Another one of our great mayors who has been such a leader on this issue. last year even bringing a lot of children to the Capitol to talk about, their schools, their leaky roofs, their, dealing with challenging things within the classroom that we won't go all into here, but has really been an outspoken voice, but at the same time a collaborator to figure out a way to do it better. Mayor Justin Elicker of New Haven.
Thanks, Joe. And I did not bring the kids up here. The kids brought themselves up here. It was pretty incredible how organized they were. I mean, you see here, and this is just a snapshot of the number of mayors and first select people across the state that are really, really frustrated about this issue, and that we are together. It's small towns, it's big cities, it's Republicans, it's Democrats, it's unaffiliated. We are all standing together to say something's got to change here. Something's got to change. There's no more powerful lever to change a child's trajectory in life than education. And the reality now is that we, in the way we fund public schools in Connecticut, is not able to deliver on this promise that we give our kids to have an equal opportunity to thrive in the future. The state's outdated education funding formula has not been updated since 2013. The dollar amount that the state estimates it costs to fund the education of an average child has not gone up since 2013. What else has not gone up since 2013? Nothing. Every other cost, you name it, has gone up dramatically since 2013. And it is time for us to see that funding formula change. We need to see the foundation amount go up. We need to see it tied to inflation, a real acknowledgement that if inflation exists, and so that we're not here in another 5 years with another press conference asking the state to change yet again the ECS formula. We need these improvements now. And I want to be clear about why. The state has consistently in recent years either kept taxes for its residents flat or reduced taxes, and this year there's a talk about a rebate. Meanwhile, all of us are raising taxes. I've raised, and people say you're crazy that you keep saying this in front of the press, I've raised taxes pretty much every year that I've been mayor for the last 6 years, whether it's an actual mill rate increase or, as many of us experience, you have a revow, you reduce your mill rate, but even so, your taxes for your residents go up. I've raised taxes pretty much every year to pay for the funding that our kids need. In the past 6 years, the city of New Haven has increased its portion of education funding by over 60%. I mean, you think about that. In 6 years, we've increased our portion by over 10% a year. And meanwhile, the state has increased its portion of ECS and Alliance funding to the city of New Haven by just around 1%, not even close to keeping up with inflation. Our residents are bearing the burden. So while there's talk about keeping taxes flat or cutting taxes, there's actually an impact on residents across the state where we're seeing our property taxes go up to fill that gap. And that is just not sustainable. And our systems are really struggling for this. Last year, our New Haven Public Schools budget faced a $23 million gap. We've closed 4 schools in the recent years. We've merged 2 others. We are doing our part, and we need to see the state do its part. This year, we're looking at, as we pull together the budget for next year, potentially another $18 million funding gap that we are going to have to either fill or find massive cuts. The good news is there is growing consensus. We put a lot of effort, many of us last year, in pushing for these reforms. And this year we're hearing really positive things. Senator Looney and the Senate Democrats put forward Priority Bill 7 that dramatically increases the foundation amount. That is inspiring to see that. We're behind the senators and do what we can to help support that. The governor in his state of the state expressed openness and acknowledgement that we need to update this foundation amount. The good news is that we're seeing some progress, but this is not across the finish line. And let me just finish by underscoring why this is so important. It's about property taxes, but ultimately it's about our kids. In New Haven, we have 46 school counselors for 19,000 students. I mean, you think about that. That is a ratio of 1 counselor per 409 students. How can students that are first-generation college goers possibly receive any support for their counselors when you have a counselor that has 409 students that they're responsible for. We have 52 social workers for 19,000 students, one social worker per 358 students. School psychologists, we have 27 for 19,000 students. Our students are dealing with, in many cases, all kinds of challenges, experiencing poverty, ESL learners, trauma in their community. We need many more counselors, psychologists in our schools than a lot of our the places where I grew up in New Canaan, where we had all kinds of resources that kids in my community in New Haven do not have. We have 23 librarians for 39 schools. Our kids need this support. This is the time to do it. I'm cautiously optimistic because we have an incredible coalition here. We got to get this across the finish line. Thank you.
You are listening to the Municipal Voice on WNHH 103.5 FM.
Today it's my pleasure to bring to you Mayor Molly Spino of Torrington.
Good morning, everyone. I am Molly Spino. I am the new mayor of the city of Torrington. I'm really proud to be here today. I had some big shoes to fill, as you mentioned, with former Mayor Carbone, but I think I'm doing a pretty good job so far. So I represent a mid-sized city, and in many ways, our community looks very different from others across Connecticut. We're not a large urban center, and we're not a small rural town. But when it comes to the affordability, the pressures we're facing all look very similar. Across Connecticut, rising costs are hitting people where it hurts most. Property taxes continue to climb, and that impact is being felt by seniors on fixed incomes, by our working families, and the renters who are also seeing those expenses being passed down onto them. Whether you live in a city neighborhood, a suburb, or a small town, the bill looks the same no matter what mailbox it shows up in. In Torrington, we saw this pressure very clearly last year with our reval. In many cases, the assessed values of homes doubled. At the same time, commercial properties saw far less impact. The result was a shift in a tax burden away from the commercial properties and onto our homeowners. This wasn't driven by local policy decisions. It was driven by market focus and structural realities that municipalities cannot control. And this is exactly where local governments get squeezed. When costs rise and revenue options are limited, we're left with very few tools. And that's where school funding becomes the common denominator. Now, I, as a community leader, have seen the rift that has come from our city and the Board of Education. And I know this isn't just a Torrington issue. I know this is an issue across the state of Connecticut and these relationships. As a municipal leader, I want to fund our schools. I want to have the best school in Connecticut. I want our teachers to have the items that they need to teach our students, and most importantly, I want our students to thrive. But at what cost? Taxing the families out of their homes? We can't do that. So this is why it's so important to be clear about what the issue is and what it is not. This is not a city problem, and it's not a small town problem. It's not an urban issue or a rural one, but it's a statewide policy problem. When the state underfunds ECS, it shifts the burden onto every local government, regardless of zip code. Every mayor, first selectman, and board of finance ends up making up the same painful trade-offs. That's why ECS reform matters so much. Fixing the formula is one of the most effective affordability tools available to the state. It's not just education policy, it's tax policy, it's housing policy, and it's affordability policy rolled into one. When ECS is funded properly, cities gain stability. Suburban and rural towns, we gain predictability. Residents get real reform and relief from rising property taxes. And students, no matter where they live, get the opportunities they deserve to succeed. At the end of the day, this isn't about capacity. Connecticut has the resources to do better. Continuing to underfund ECS is a choice to push costs onto local taxpayers and deepen the affordability crisis. Reforming ECS is also a choice to share responsibility fairly across the state and invest in our future. We all have different communities, but we all have the same problem, but the same solution as well. I think it's time to fix ECS. Thank you.
Next up, I'm going to bring Mayor Anne-Marie Dragonis, our first selectwoman, Anne-Marie Dragonis from the town of Seymour, up to speak to you on how this underfunding of public education is affecting her community.
Thank you, everyone. I'm Anne-Marie Dragonis, the first selectwoman for the town of Seymour. Education is our largest budget item. It is 65% of our budget. Seniors on fixed income, working families, and renters in our community all feel the property taxes rise. They feel it immediately, not a year or 2 years down the road. When ECS doesn't keep pace with inflation or the actual student needs, towns are left holding the bill. We don't have menus of options like the state does. We can raise property taxes and cut services to our residents. That is it. Neither is acceptable or affordable, or our quality of life, as I like to say. ECS reform is a local tax relief. Fixing the ECS formula is one of the most effective, affordable tools the state has. Every dollar the state fails to fund through ECS shows up on our property bills. ECS reform would reduce pressure on our local tax increases, stabilize municipal budgets, and protect our seniors, our young at hearts, families, single parents, renters, and it would further the cost shifting. This is a policy choice. It's not about fiscal impossibilities. It's about priorities. The state has options, towns and cities don't. Continuing to underfund ECS is a choice that pushes costs down to local level and onto our residents, the ones that are least able to absorb them. If we want Connecticut to be affordable, we have to stop balancing the budgets on the local property taxes. Fixing ECS is about fairness, predictability, and affordability. That is what the people deserve. Towns have been doing their part. Now we need the state to do theirs. Thank you.
From right here in the backyard of the state capitol, the mayor of Hartford, Mayor Arunan Arulampalam.
You've heard from a number of my colleagues who spoke incredibly eloquently about the challenges that all of our communities are facing. And you guys have heard our stories in Hartford. You've reported on our stories, so I won't repeat any of that, but I'll say that we have all faced these challenges. In fact, an incredibly diverse coalition of my peers are standing behind me because we are all facing these challenges today. Small towns and big cities, Democrats and Republicans, urban, rural, suburban, all of our communities are standing together. And that's significant because we may not agree on everything, but we agree on a few shared values. One, that looking after the next generation of young people, looking for the future of our state and our municipalities is our most important and most trusted role as public servants. But also that the way in which we have funded education is broken. I think we understand that. It's common sense. We all understand that the way in which we have chosen to fund education is broken. We have in Connecticut both the most expensive and the least equitable, least fair form of education funding in the country. And that's a choice. I want to be clear about that. That is a choice that we make, to have the most expensive and the least fair form of education funding. It is a choice that we make year after year when we fail to fix the ECS formula, the education funding formula. It's a choice that we make year after year when we fail to plan for the future. And it is a time to make a different choice, that this year we believe we can make a different choice by fixing our ECS formula and by tying the foundation to inflation so that year after year we acknowledge that education costs are going to rise and we will plan for it, because it is so important that we plan for the future of our children and the future of our municipalities, that every child has access to excellent schools and that every community has access to affordability. And we can do that together. We are standing here not to go to war over this, but because we believe that we can be partners in this. We are standing here because we believe that this governor who talked about education funding in his State of the State could be the governor who fixes it. We believe that this legislature, that Speaker Ritter and Senator Looney and legislative leaders who have been actively engaged in these conversations with mayors and first selectmen and towns and municipalities across the state will be the legislature that finally gets it right on education. We believe that now is the time that we can finally fix this education funding formula to ensure that every child, no matter what zip code they're born into, has access to an excellent education. This state knows how to do that. We have some of the best school systems, some of the best school districts, some of the best schools in the country. And we have many schools that are struggling and many communities that are struggling to afford our education system. We believe that this could be the time that we chart a new course. And we're standing here to be partners to this governor, to this legislature, to work together collaboratively to build school districts where every child has access to excellence, where we can all afford a basic way of life, and that we can do that in a way that plans for the future of our educational expenses. We are incredibly optimistic and hopeful that this is the time to chart a different path. Thank you, guys.
And yes, Mayor, to be clear, you were definitely one of the top 5 finest speakers that we had today. So this is the point of the program here in a second that we'll go and ask for those who have questions. I'm going to pose, before we do, a very rhetorical question to 4 of our 5 speakers. I know the media gets to ask the questions. Maybe you want to ask them this question. But the rhetorical question to the mayor of New London, the mayor of Hartford, the mayor of Torrington, and the mayor of New Haven is, what would it mean to your communities, to your budgets, to your property taxpayers, if you received 40% more in education funding from the state than you receive right now? What would that mean? Because to do that, there is a way to do it without asking folks in this building and the governor to do it. It's to simply pick your cities up and move them north into Massachusetts. Because the state of Massachusetts at the state level does spend 40% more in its 10 lowest spending districts, its 10 lowest funded districts, than Connecticut does. A 40% disparity. That is remarkable. So when you talk about moving, and people talk about moving south or moving here, if you want to have a better education system in those cities that just spoke, just move north, just move right across the border, because they will fund you at a 40% higher level than what we currently do here in Connecticut. I think that really needs to change. And the last thing that I'm going to say, I've never done this before, but I guess because I've been here over a decade, some of these stories I already know how they're going to be written. And one person who's not here, and I'm sure not listening to this, but we'll see articles about it, we'll write about it later, is a friend of mine, somebody who I've had great conversations with over the years. There's a columnist, Mike Powell. And I can already read Mike Powell's article because I've read it for so many years. Mike Powell is going to say that a bunch of mayors came up here to once again whine for more money for public education, but not one thing was talked about reform, about making the expense better, about fixing the system that is broken. It was all about just funding it. And I'd just like to respond to that and say it's true. It's true. And when this building and when our leaders have the appetite for those levels of reform, we as an organization and these mayors and first select people up here, we would be happy to be at the table and to have that conversation because it's needed. But until we get to that point, we have to fund the system that we currently have in place. The system that has been created and protected within state policy cannot then be ignored and not funded because the same state policy people think that it may be inefficient, whether it is or it isn't. When you create it and you don't reform it, you have to fund it. And since 2013, again, well, state revenues have outpaced inflation. There has not been a single inflationary adjustment made to these communities, shifting all of that burden of that unreformed system straight over to property taxpayers.
The Municipal Voice is a co-production by CCM and WNHH 103.5 FM. Joe Thornton is our executive producer, Christopher Gilson is our producer, Harry Draws is on the boards, and I'm Matt Ford, your host. Be sure to check out our Facebook page and give us a like. And watch out for our CCM chat series on our YouTube page.